What were the initial signs to get you to start to be open to Islam and then take the action to convert?
I've lived in Saudi Arabia at that point in time. It had been, call it 5 or 6 years. And of course, it's a country where Islam is practiced. And so every day, 5 times a day, you will hear the Adan. As a non-Muslim, I was completely unaware as to what was actually being said. And simply hearing it, I knew that means, okay, shops are going to be closed and people are going to go pray. But somewhere along the lines, I learned what the Adan meant. And it wasn't until one day I literally going from A to B in my house, I heard the Adan. At that point, I realized I was kind of at the T-junction. Even now, as I say it, I get goosebumps. It was an arbitrary Tuesday. And I heard it, stopped, and I paused for a second. I was like, okay, I'm going that way.
As a health practitioner, what does health mean to you?
Ultimately, health is balance, right? If we are imbalanced in our energy, at some point in time, that deficit is going to lead us to disease. And important to note that disease is hyphenated as 2 words because disease precedes disease, and then disease is going to precede death. So ultimately, we need to be balancing. It is our masculine energy and our feminine energy. The way in which we do that, or I suppose it's important to understand, the feminine energy is really about caring and bringing energy into our body, so accumulating energy. And we do that through good nutrition, hydration, and sleep. And the masculine energy is really more about doing, and that is also energy expenditure. So that is breathing, thinking, and moving. And oftentimes we find that the world right now is in a hypermasculine state. So we have too much energy being expended and not enough energy accumulated. And herein lies the birth of all of the disease which we know.
I love that explanation. And I think that there's a big misconception when it comes to masculine and feminine energy, where as in men believe that they carry more masculine energy or that they should not carry any feminine energy. And same goes to women, where they feel that they have to have all the feminine energy and that they cannot have any masculine energy. So what would you say to somebody who is trying to understand how to balance both energies within them and then to also understand that energy?
Trying to understand the both energies within them, I think ultimately we must understand that there are polarities within everything in life. So you cannot exist. There is no such thing as a wave in the ocean. If it does not have the bottom, it does not have the top. If there is no peak, there is no trough. We do not get night without day. So the same within every single human being. You cannot be complete, whole, and balanced and healthy if you do not have your corresponding energy. I am a man, yes, but I need to have feminine energy. I need to care for myself. It does not mean that I'm excessively feminine, but these are essential in order for me to express my masculinity in its full divinity.
And how do we come into balance?
I like to think that balance is a constant series of iterations. Today I wake up, I am, at least as I perceive it, in a state of balance. Everything is good, I feel great. I go out into my day and something is going to knock me off of that balance. Whether it is an emotion, whether it is some form of a physical trauma, that will put me off. And then it is my duty to come back to that balanced state. You can also think of the word as balance as homeostasis or equilibrium, right? Ultimately, we need to be in the middle line. And I believe even within religions, specifically in Islam, this is something which is encouraged too.
At what point, when you become a health practitioner, do you decide to make the move to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia?
I actually became first a functional fitness coach. That was something I was always interested in doing. And that was my initial move to Jeddah. And I, since coming into Jeddah, have made the transition to be a holistic health practitioner. And I've studied continuously in this regard.
The majority of your clients, are they coming to you more for the mental or the physical issues?
This is a mix. I would say at the moment there is probably more physical issues, and perhaps that is also because of the awareness of the client. And as they proceed in their awareness, or as they progress in their awareness, so they start to address more of the mental issues, or as they start to work with me, I make them aware of perhaps some of the mental emotional issues that may be stored within their system that are causing some of the chronic physical pains.
As it is all a very connected system. When you realize that there's an issue with the body, you realize there's an issue with the mind, and vice versa. In terms of how you deal with your own mental health and your own physical health, what does that look like to you on a day-to-day basis?
It starts with consistency, it ends with excellence, and it is governed by integrity. I like to wake up early, I pray, I meditate, I prioritize time for myself in my own internal state. And I find that the early morning is the best time to do this. I am a very big advocate, as I like to tell people, move to improve. And I encourage this to be done as early in the day as possible. So I like to get some form of a workout early in my day. I very much enjoy exposing myself to extreme temperatures, so that whether that may be a sauna, a steam room, and an ice bath, these are practices which I thoroughly enjoy too. I enjoy journaling, which is me expressing my thoughts, my emotions on a piece of paper. And that can happen in various different ways. Sometimes it's just venting to a friend who's holding space for me. From a mental, emotional perspective, I pay great attention to what I'm feeling in my body and the emotions which are showing up. So if I experience a certain situation, I try to take a small moment to pause and notice what that emotion is in my body. I try to name it, I try to locate it, I try to sense what that feeling is, and then I would sit with that experience, I would breathe through that and allow that to pass through me. I'm a very big advocate that the word emotion really refers to energy and motion. Our emotions are not supposed to be stagnant, right? There is a saying, your issues are stored in your tissues, right? And I personally believe this as your mental issues are stored in your physical tissues. And so once we allow ourselves to express those emotions, to release them, we find that there is so much more ease within our body. If I use a simple example, a client recently has been very angry for an extended period of time, and now more recently has started having some right shoulder pain attached to this anger. Clients don't particularly realize that their physical pain is related to their emotional pain, right? Clients also has potential liver issues. And we know that the liver, which is an organ, is very commonly having a viscerosomatic, which means an organ muscle reflex that refers to the right shoulder. And so once we've started to address firstly a backed up liver, which can affect many other functions in the body, as well as some of the emotional anger, which he has not been able to release, many of these chronic shoulder pains have dissipated. And so this is a simple example of how we can use the mental emotional to fix the physical.
I really appreciate your view on that, because that is something that is very much neglected in the health space. And it's funny because somebody brought this up to me a couple of days ago of, I just need to, I'm going to have thyroid issues if you don't let me speak up. And I was like, yes, that is very true. And I really do believe that, yes, our emotions are motions in the body. And the majority of the time we spend our time reflecting on meta emotions, which are thinking about emotions rather than allowing us to feel our emotions. We think about what it's like to feel bad, which makes us feel bad because we're lost in the thought of it, rather than allowing ourselves to feel it and release it, because it takes around 90 seconds, according to doctors, that it takes 90 seconds to motion through the body and pass through the body, which when you sit down with emotion, it can feel uncomfortable, which is why a lot of people resist it. So how do you navigate that with clients?
Firstly, I fully agree, and I appreciate that you're aware that an emotion takes 90 seconds to pass through the body. There's thousands of studies showing this by now. Again, I'm a very big believer. Something within my own philosophy that I've conceived is that knowledge is the embodiment of awareness. Awareness precedes change, and change precedes growth. Ultimately, we have a problem and we want the solution. The solution is the growth. First, one must be educated. They must understand with knowledge, and they must acknowledge what is happening. With that new awareness, they can then make the changes necessary to achieve that growth. To go from A to B, one must change. Or to go from 0 to 1, there is a change required. So to follow this process of educating someone, hopefully you are able to share the complex knowledge in a very simple way to the layperson so they can understand it and they can say, okay, let's give it a try. And once they start to make that change, then they start to see those results.
I agree with that. I'm curious to know, do you believe that there is hope for anybody that is dealing with dis-ease right now in their life? Because I think some people get really lost in the pain, they get lost in the hurt, they get lost in the fear of certain diseases within their bodies and their mind, and they feel like it's incurable. What are your beliefs around that?
I think the word incurable is overused. And I certainly, because I've seen it in with my own eyes, that everything is curable. And that being by our own practices and by our own work, as well as by divine intervention.
And what is that divine intervention to you?
This is Rabbana. This is the Creator. What He wills is, we have no chance against this. When He says be, it is. This that we're living in and we're living on, this is through Him. So perhaps the idea of divine intervention or God, Allah, Gaia, Mother Nature, whatever people call it, however they conceive it in their head, that is completely up to them. But certainly there is something greater than us that has created all of this.
I'm curious to know more about your conversion to Islam, if that's something you're open to talk about.
Sure.
When did you come into Islam and what guided you there?
Alhamdulillah, it's been just under 18 months. What guided me? Certainly He guided me. But I don't know a different way to say it. His disciples also, they guided me. I wanted to say His messengers, and certainly they did. But the pious people of this land, whom I've been very privileged to spend time with, and I saw with my own two eyes, and I felt in my heart how they lived their lives was the way that I wanted to live my life. And just by spending time around them, being curious, asking questions, oftentimes their answers were with reference to Quran or Hadith. This is where I slowly started to, again, build knowledge and awareness of this faith and of this tradition. And then there was a very big step, which was when someone, a very dear friend and mentor, gave me a Quran. And I read that from start to finish whilst observing Ramadan some years back. And that was the next big step moving towards Islam. And over multiple years, I started to really build more curiosity and then read deeper within to the Quran, because the book is alive, subhanAllah. Every time you read it, it is different to you. Every time you read it, you are different with it. And so it will give you the answers you need when you need it. And being someone who grew up in the Western world, being someone whose introduction to Islam was actually watching on television breaking news of 9/11, I had certain ideas conditioned within my head, as we all do. And I'm ever grateful that I was able to ask those questions and I was able to receive answers. And 99% of the time, what I found is that Islam is always protecting women, which was something that, at least in the Western world and in Western media, is stigmatized, that women in Islam do not have rights. When I inquired further, I found that, in fact, Islam is really helping women as much as it possibly can. So in every place that I had curiosities, the answers which were shared with me through the people that brought me to Islam, after my own reflections, I fully resonated with. And I, further to that, I agreed to the extent that that was something I wanted to apply in my livelihood.
What were the initial signs to get you to start to be open to Islam and then take the action to convert?
I've lived in Saudi Arabia at that point in time. It had been, call it 5 or 6 years. And of course, it's a country where Islam is practiced. And so every day, 5 times a day, you will hear the Adan. As a non-Muslim, I was completely unaware as to what was actually being said. And simply hearing it, I knew that means, okay, shops are going to be closed and people are going to go pray. That was how I conceived the idea of the Adan and the Akama. But somewhere along the lines, I learned what the Adan meant. And it wasn't until one day, I literally, going from A to B in my house, I heard the Adan and I stopped and realized, oh wait. At that point, I realized I was kind of at the T-junction. Even now, as I say it, I get goosebumps. It was an arbitrary Tuesday. And I heard it, stopped, and I paused for a second. I was like, okay, I'm going that way. And then as time went on and I started walking down that road, many a times I thought, no, let me go back. But I started to learn even further what was being said. And then I started to understand that this system, at least for me, was the best system for me. When I looked at the 5 pillars of Islam and specifically something like Salah, if you follow Salah as 5 times a day, you're probably living in a very healthy manner. Because if you're sleeping after Isha, because you're going to get your 8+ hours sleep and then wake up at Fajr or Hajjud and then go about your day, you're probably living in a very healthy manner. So as a health practitioner, I started to piece together, oh, hang on a second, this system was created to make us healthy humans. This system contributes to our health. And of course, there are plenty of Muslims who are not practicing perfectly, but there are plenty of Muslims who are also very unhealthy in their daily life. That is not a reflection of Islam. That is a reflection of them as individuals, and bless all of them.
I very much appreciate you saying that, because I think when people really do follow and practice Islam in the way that it is taught, in the way that the Quran teaches it, in the way that the prophets have showcased it, then you really do embody true health. And when I talk about health, I talk about it again holistically in mind, body, and soul, because every action in Islam, every single thing leads to a better quality of life when you do follow it through. So I appreciate people that either recently convert, where they really learn, take the time to dive deep into Islam and understand the history of it and all the workings of Islam. And then, of course, everybody who does take the time to learn the Quran in the way that they interpret it for themselves, because like we said earlier, you interpret it for yourself in different ways each time because it reveals something to you each time. I'm curious to know what your favorite surah is, or which one resonates the most with you.
This is tricky because from one day to the next, it can be a different surah. And maybe in truth, it's from one chapter of life to the next. it can be a different surah. Right now, what resonates most deeply with me is Surah Al-Kawthar. But there are so many small ayahs within the Quran, as well as hadiths, that I hold very, very close to my heart. Now, alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, some of my close friends who, mashallah, are very faithful and strong in the deen, they have shared with me the ways in which you can strengthen your dua. And I never knew these ways before, and since I've started doing that, I see it manifesting in my life, right? When I first decided I wanted to learn Ayat al-Kursi, I couldn't get past literally the second sentence. And it felt like everything was really stagnant in life. So I put that down and I moved to something more simple from the back of the Quran. Some months went by and then I came back to Ayat al-Kursi. And I decided, yes, I wanted to truly make this effort. And I understood what the significance of Ayat al-Kursi was. And so, alhamdulillah, at that point and in that attempt to memorize the ayah, thereafter, again, everything started to open up. And I share this with people, and some people might think, oh, he's nuts, or whatever the case may be. But I share this with pious people and studious scholars, and they turn around and they tell me the same story. When I was learning X, all of these things started to manifest in their lives. So, subhanAllah, as we learn and as we embody more of the Quran, our life begins to unfold.
I would love if you could expand more on what exactly you found in the surah that made you feel very in touch with it.
I understand, and I've learned, thankfully, from a lot of my friends who have helped me in my deen, Ayat al-Kursi is imperative for our protection, for our safety. And at the time that I needed it most was when I fully came to reciting and embodying that ayah. But above and beyond the masjid that I enjoy going to, whereby I have the imam is very generous and he helps me to learn new surahs and ayahs. He helps me with the pronunciations as well as with tajweed. He said to me, after every salah, pray Ayat al-Kursi. And I was just blindly trusting him. But as I started to do that, again, the same way when I started to see results through holistic health, there was no more resistance. I was no longer blindly thinking, okay, let me just do this. At that point, I was truly believing this is contributing. This is from the Quran. This is the word of Allah. And so every time I saw things get better in my life, I attributed Ayat al-Kursi to be a contributor towards that.
I'm very curious to know, as you have you moved to the Middle East, you moved to Saudi Arabia, and you're already on your health journey. You were already in, I guess, recovery in quotation marks, and you were you have not yet established or converted to Islam. What do you feel like was the biggest difference in terms of your health, mentally, emotionally, physically, prior to conversion and then after conversion?
If I start with the easy one, which is my physical health. I've played many sports. I have unfortunately accumulated many injuries. And we carry these injuries within ourselves. Unfortunately, we also carry the imbalances of modern day life within ourselves. So we live a lot of our life in the seated position, which contributes towards certain muscles getting strong and tight and other muscles getting weak and long. And as I started to pray and go through the motions of prayer, firstly, there was a lot of pain in my body because I was not actually supple enough to perform all of these positions. But as time went on, I found physical pains which have been in my body for years that I dealt with chronically on a daily basis slowly dissipated. And again, that was all of the evidence I needed to keep going, right? If at first I was praying a few of the prayers a day and I saw that difference, for sure I went to 5 times a day. And then for sure I went to 7 times a day if you add tahajjud and witr, or you add sunnah prayers. So from the physical perspective, I felt the pain in my body disappearing. And so that was all the evidence I required. From a mental perspective, it's very difficult for me to explain this, because if I had 100 things that I was worried about, after Islam, I almost forgot about those things. I don't even know what they were. And that proved to me that so much of it was really, it was me suffering in imagination, but not in reality. And so now every time when I come to my prayer mat, or now every time when I sit down to learn from someone who is strong in their deen, stronger than myself, someone who has intentions to help me come closer to Rabbana, it's almost as if there is no time. After we have been speaking for a little while, I look and see, oh, it's 3 hours have gone. Because you are purely present in the moment, and in that time you were not concerned for the 7 different problems you have in your life, or maybe 70. And so I've learned that with my consistency in prayer, and with my consistency in trying as best as possible to be on my deen, with the consistency of being around pious people, I have found that all of these mental, emotional issues, not all of them, but the vast majority of them, especially the small ones which are insignificant but accumulate to actually hurt us, these have dissipated. And alhamdulillah, my head is much, much more clearer. I feel like prayer is a form of meditation. If you breathe correctly through it, there is another element of health attached to it. And so it has almost become a physical, mental, emotional piece of health every time I pray.
I want to ask you how you are currently feeling in the current state you're in, mentally, emotionally, physically, being in this country, embracing Islam. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah. I don't think it could be any better. Until He makes it better, I'm entirely grateful. Every day I'm grateful to wake up to do what I love. I love the people I work with. I'm very grateful for all that I have in my life, all the good that I'm surrounded by, all the love that is Islam. For alhamdulillah, I don't have another word.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
I have some couple of fun questions I like to ask, and then I like to end off with a couple of questions, a little bit longer length. And they're usually 2, but in all honesty, based on this conversation, I'm probably going to have more than 2 questions at the top of my head. So I thought we could get into the fun questions, and then we can move on to the last couple of questions. So the first question is, if you could collaborate or work with anybody in this world on anything, who would you work with and what would it be on?
Yeah, I'd want to work with someone who wants to help the poor people and those who are in poverty have a better life, have food every day and not have to struggle. I don't know the name of that organization, but that is the type of work I'd like to be involved in.
A country that best describes you.
South Africa.
A song that you could choose if you needed a theme song for your life.
There is a song I really enjoy. It's by J. Cole and Little Dirk, All My Life.
You get to have a call with anybody in this world for 1 hour. Who would you call and what would you say? Or what would you ask?
Dead or alive?
Dead or alive.
Yeah, I'm going to call the Prophet Muhammad and I'm going to ask him all the questions in my heart. Inshallah, he's going to give me the answers.
I love that answer. Well, like I said, I like to end off with just a couple of questions. Usually there are 2, but with this case, I have a couple. And the first one is 3 recommendations to anybody right now who is wanting to improve their health.
Eat whole foods, fresh and organic where possible. Drink adequate, clean water. And sleep 8 or more hours every day.
What would you advise anybody right now who's listening to this or watching this and is dealing with some kind of ailment, disease within their body, who needs some beacon of hope?
I would say that you need to get clear on what is your dream. You need to get clear on what it is you want to do in this lifetime. Because once I'm clear on my dream, my goals, my objectives, I have a North Star. I know where I'm going, right? If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you're driving out of your driveway and you don't have a location, are you going left or are you going right? Right? So when you are clear on your dreams, your goals and objectives, then you can start to align your actions to achieve that which it is you want.
I full-heartedly believe in that too. If you could say something to somebody who is either reluctant about this country, about Islam, what would you say to that person?
Reluctant about this country? Come and see. Very simple. My family from South Africa recently came here. They were concerned. What do we have to wear? What do we have to do? What about X? What about Y? And then they came here and they're like, oh, wow, this is wonderful. This is more safe by a country mile than South Africa, right? The people are wonderful. They're generous. Everything is available. We're not living in a desert. It's not camels. And this is a modern society. So, yeah, those who have their suspicions, probably from what they have heard or been propagated through Western media, come see. About Islam, you know, it's very difficult for me to try and tell anyone that they have to come to Islam or that Islam is the way, because for me, I know that Islam is best for me. Maybe someone sitting somewhere in Europe, Judaism is best for them. That is their prerogative. You know, how they choose to live their life. Inshallah, they are not killing people, they are not doing bad. This is your choice. In Islam, we say, Lakum dinakum waliya din. So my faith is mine and your faith is yours. As long as we can coexist with love, with peace, with a sense of equality, this is what Islam is. And if you can match those values, we can all sit at the table together.
I very much appreciate that answer. I want to ask you one final question, but before I do, something that I wish I asked you earlier is, when did you learn Arabic and was it easy for you?
You know, my father from a very young age, I'm very grateful for all of which he's done for me in my lifetime, as well as my sister and my family as a whole. He always taught me, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And that included language. So as soon as I got to Saudi, I picked up, of course, on, you know, the commonalities, or inshallah, mashallah, alhamdulillah. These you're going to hear as soon as you get here. But I picked up a book at some point and I just wanted to get the alphabet and start to slowly understand. And as time progressed, and as I recognized how beneficial it would be for me to converse, at least in basic Arabic, with someone at the market or the airport or the taxi, I then started to take more interest. So at that point, I got a teacher, and she helped me over the course of a few years. And that took me to a point where I was at least able to understand most of what's being said. I would openly admit that my vocabulary is not extensive enough to always respond as much as I would like to. But yes, this was the process. And then, you know, when you become a Muslim and you start to read the Quran, again, you start to learn bits and pieces further. And as people share with you small surahs or ayahs or dua, and then they explain it to you, and then you start to repeat it. So these bits and pieces start to become embedded within you.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time when it comes to learning a new language, we overcomplicate it sometimes. But I think even when you're moving into a place, it's kind of like survival. Like out of survival, you need to learn a new language. So it comes a lot easier to foreigners than we would think. But it's very interesting. And the final question is, if there's a motto that you live by that you would wish other people to instill in themselves, what is that motto?
When I came to Islam, it was actually out in the wilderness. I went into a silent retreat, and I had been wanting to do the silent retreat for quite some time. So at the spur of a moment around Hajj season, ironically or not, I went and bought a tent, and I said, okay, I'm going to go out. I knew I was going south, and then I would see where I landed up. So I turned off the radio, I turned off my cell phone, I had no interaction with human beings, and I drove deep into Najran, and I landed up in a wadi, and I pitched my tent, and I was going to live there for a few days in complete silence, in solitude, with myself and my thoughts. I had no idea what was going to come. And so before going out, I wrote in my diary, my daily journal, just very quickly, surrender and love. That was what it was going to be. And that was my intention attached to that journey. So long story short, I get out there. It is daytime in the middle of this wadi. The next closest human being might be 30 kilometers, 50 kilometers away from me. So if something goes wrong, it goes wrong. I enjoyed the daytime, and then I got to nighttime, and I pitched a fire. I had a little tea, but I was absolutely terrified, because I was, at that point, only when the lights went out, I realized if something goes wrong, no one's coming to get me, right? And you hear the echoes of every leaf that falls, of every bird that flaps its wing, of the wild baboons down the wadi, of the wind coming through the wadi. And in that terrified moment, I was surrounded by crickets making small, and that brought me peace, because when the crickets go quiet is when something's coming. Soon enough, the crickets went quiet, and I realized something was coming. I had no idea what it was, but being terrified and being anxious went from level 100 to level infinity, until a shadow entered my light, and that was the shadow of a cat. But the fire had projected the cat's shadow to be massive, much larger than myself. And in that state of scaredness and anxiety, when I realized it was the cat, I basically freaked out in anger and threw stones in an attempt to defend myself, which is very unlike myself. Generally, I'm a calm individual. But in that state, I heard a very, very profound voice coming from my heart to say surrender. And with that surrender, with that moment of surrender, I took a breath, and as I exhaled, everything was at peace. And so I felt like I received this very clear message, going back to an earlier topic that we touched on. Surrender, that was the message, which I agreed with and I was happy to live by. But I need a bit more than surrender, because I can surrender, I can go live in a cave and I can read the Quran and pray, and that is surrender. I personally need to do more than that in my life. I want to make a loving difference. And so as the days went by, out in the silence, in the solitude, in nature, in deep contemplation of myself, in meditation, on the idea of surrender, it came to me that what I want to do in this world is to love. With all of my actions, is to love. And that was the moment that I realized surrender and love. So my motto at that point and for my life and as a Muslim was, I am surrendered to the Almighty. And in my actions, what I want to do is love. What I want to spread is love. And what I want to help people do is spread more love. So surrender and love.
I love that. And honestly, no comment there. That was a beautiful story. That was a beautiful way to wrap up this whole conversation. And I really appreciate you, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your devotion, not only to God, but to yourself and the work that you're doing. I really do appreciate you, and thank you.
Thank you so much.